Up here in Mesquite Bay, well, before we get into the report, I'd like to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas. I hope you have an enjoyable day, an enjoyable week, and just have a lot of fun and fellowship with your friends and family. So, with that said, hopefully you get a chance to get out on the water and fish, and you can use this report to kind of head in that direction. So, we've been working the drop on the edge out here on the this flat on this side over here, this Cedar Flat area. Of course, again, our water levels we've had some variance. We've had some little steadiness there for about a day or two, and then the water started dropping back out. So it's something to keep your eye on. I've mentioned that several times in the past, especially now. So looks like this upcoming week, weather-wise, is going to be pretty stable as far as sunniness, maybe a few clouds here and there, but there's nothing significant as far as a cold front that's coming our way that's going to push or pull water. So we are on the backside of our full moon, headed at transition days, wild card days, if you will, headed toward a new moon. So this will be a great week to be able to get out there on that water because you'll be in the middle of that new moon this upcoming week. We've been just working the grass line edges, working as much to the shoreline as we can. Our water temps have varied somewhat from mid 60s to the low 70s, and it's been pretty good. Obviously, as the day wears on, it gets a little bit warmer in the water temps. But if you're fishing early, sun up or just a little after sun up, those water temps have been hovering in the low 60s, depending on which estuary that you're in. If you're up in here, it's been closer to the 50s with some of our chilly nights that we have had over the past week. So we're starting off on a little bit deeper edge and see if we can't locate some fish that are hanging there. We've worked up into Cedar and worked the flats out on the side here. You got the right kind of structure there. We've located a few trout, redfish. With flounder season working back open now, and duck season as well. Those are two things that, especially the duck season, you have to make sure you're well aware of. That you, again, I've mentioned in the past, make sure you have about 2 or 3 different locations in a particular area. So in case you encounter duck hunters in the area that you really want to start your day, that you can go to somewhere else pretty close by. But like I say, we've been working these edges here. We've come across some flounder, redfish, trout has been pretty much the norm. Then get on the back side of the Madre out here on the edge out there. Because if you get up there real close to the shoreline, you'll notice really quick that it's calf deep water or less, depending on where you're at and the tide on that particular day. And then we've kind of just worked our way back around toward the Texas Parks and Wildlife division that's over there, that little deeper gut, that old harbor. There's been a few fish we found in there on one particular day. Not a tremendous amount. There's a handful they're hanging off in that deeper water. So it's just an affirmation for us to continue to fish the deeper edges over the mud and the grass and those types of areas to start our day off. So then we'd come on around here, around by the floater here in Bray Cove, and you hit the little back lake mouths that are here. You've got guts that are in those that are all good little spots to hit. Again, you got the right structure that's in there. We still got plenty of bait that's working in the area. Again, if you're not seeing very much bait that's working in a particular area for you, just make sure you see if you can't locate a pelican or an osprey, something to that effect, and they'll let you know if there's bait hanging there. Now, again, the main baits that we've been working, of course, in those transition days, we've kind of had a few different size profiles to work, and then of course you just color-wise, there's been nothing that's really been consistent for us one way or another this past week, so we've kind of done a little bit of everything. But the main profile size has been the 4-inch or smaller. So, in the soft dines, we've just been primarily just throwing the soft dines, throwing the Mirror Little Johns in that particular size frame. The XL has been pretty good for us as well. We've thrown that. And then, of course, the down south, we've been just throwing the original size 4-inch and then the burner shad. In those particulars, in that size and profile has been the main thing we've thrown that for us. Of course, Texas T has been okay. Big Papa, Twisted T has been a good one. White Ice, Bone Diamond have all been pretty, Watermelon Red, all have been pretty good variety of flavors that we've been throwing in that size. And then, of course, we've had a few guys throw the Corkies. Like I said, I'll throw the Devils, which I haven't thrown very much now. I've thrown the original some, and I've thrown the Double D because, like I say, the water depths in some of these areas. Double D really works really well, especially in those gut areas when you got probably waist-deep water, maybe a little bit deeper. You can kind of really bang that thing down there and let it suspend over top of some of those grass beds and have some really good success with that. If you understand how to work that Double D, it's a good quality bait, especially for this time of year. And then, of course, there's been a few other baits we've thrown that we don't typically throw, but we're just trying a little bit of variety. Of course, the coastal brew baits have been good for us for a while, but we haven't thrown a tremendous amount of those. And other than the Pav lures has been good for us. And then, of course, standby has been the knock and tail lures. In the two main flavors that we've been throwing in, that's been the heavy metal and the greenback. Those two flavors have been the most productive for us. The other flavors that, Rogue, ice or white or pearl flavor hasn't done as well for us as those two particular flavors have. But again, majors and minors are always a key thing. We've had little winds here and there, but I personally I like that 10 to 15 mile an hour wind. It really keeps things going for us. It allows us to really work an area, and of course you can find those protected areas. Just make sure you can be able to run to them safely and get to them, and just have yourself a great day out on the water this upcoming week. Back over here on the Dunham Shoreline side, this little flat area here right off the ICW, the old ICW that is, especially when the water really drops out. We've got a little bit cooler water. Water temps have been consistently dropping. I like to get on that edge out there, and there's lots of shell. There's kind of like a starfish-shaped shell bar that's over there in that particular area. If you fish there, you know about this, and that's a lot of good mud that's around that. So when the water temps get really cold, it's a really good area to kind of begin your day because you got deep water access. It's close to that. Then if you just kind of hang out and be patient and fish that area, and again, it's not a super big area, but once you just kind of hang out and fish, as long as you got some bait working in the area, you're give yourself a chance to possibly find you a nice quality fish in there. We've caught a few fish, and nothing great by any means. Typically just slot fish that are in this area here that we have found. Now that could be any given day that some fish will move into that particular area that are better, but the most of the fish that we have caught out of there have been all in that 16, 18 inch range. Been some undersized, but that's been about it for us. But again, working all that area there, working the point. There's some little area back in there. There's a little island. If you try to walk around that thing is it's super mushy. I mean, like top of your thighs, maybe even waist deep mushy. And I have yet to find a bottom to it just yet. So, depending on what you got tide-wise, you may just want to be able to stand on the outside of that and just cast baits up into it. And there's two ways to get around to it, just depending on what your wind is. But it's one of those particular areas that sets up really well if you've got a northwest, northeast wind. You can get some protection from it. And of course, we just kind of like to work here on the Dunham side, all the way back around toward the point as you get over there toward Belding and Belding Reef and Belding Lake, all this area back in here. Now, this is a little bit more, I wouldn't say your typical area that you would want to find and try to fish over because it's more hard packed that's in there, but there is plenty of grass. You do have an edge that's out there. It's got a little real subtle drop to it. But again, with our temperatures not being super cold, our air temps have not been in the low 50s, high 40s for extended period of time. We may dip down into it for one night and we rebound right back up into the 60s the next 2 or 3 days. So those water temps have not been holding cold. So these fish have really not 100% migrated over to all the mud and grass and clump shell just as of yet. So we're still locating some fish over that type of structure. Now, is it consistent? No, it's not consistent. It hasn't been. But on any particular given day, if we got maybe later in the day, it's a great opportunity for you to maybe hit. If you're fishing that area, maybe run into a different location. The sun's been kind of beaming on it. Of course, we've had some high pressure, big old bluebird sky days, so and some pretty low wind days too. So that really warms that water up, 3-4 degrees, and that makes a big difference for fish. So it's a good area to kind of put that in on your scope if you're up here fishing this particular area. So like I say, we've just been main baits, again, just what I mentioned earlier, the 4-inch and the 3-inch and down south and those flavors I mentioned earlier. If you've got other flavors that you want to throw in there, that's fine. The Little Johns, both in the XL and the original size, have been good for us. Some of this water's been pretty clean, so we've thrown a little bit more translucent baits in these particular areas, and it's been it's been somewhat good. Nothing has been knocking it out of your park. Like I said, we had some days we struggled on those transition days, and that's to be expected, especially moving forward as we get this closer to Christmas time that's coming up this week. And then, of course, getting into the new year, which will be the following week. And so I'm sure our weather patterns are going to change. We have not had a really good, hard down, cold front as of yet. We've had some cool ones that has made a difference, but until we get that one that just really just like, whoo, it's going to be cold for several days, then that's when things are going to really change. But for right now, you can still kind of waver back and forth over the mud and grass and still hard packed and still have some pretty decent days that are out on the water. Again, just working these areas, working the grass, working around into Belding Lake, it sets up well as well. And then, of course, you can get up here on the reef, here on the Cedar Dugout, and we've worked around the shell that's on the inside and then the outside of it, and there's nice, good mud that's around these areas that are all back up in here, and just kind of taking your time and work these areas. If there's some life that's showing itself, then it's been good. Of course, we haven't spent hardly any time in the last 4 or 5 days in the back lakes. There's been just not a tremendous amount of water back in there, but it's been just kind of difficult to navigate to and from. So we've just kind of left it alone and worked everything on the out front or on the outer sides of these particular shorelines. Of course, you got Carlos and these fingers in here. You can always find fish in these guts in here, especially when that water drops out and you've got the right kind of structure within that. Of course, again, what I mentioned earlier, their temperatures are still holding, 60-ish, so it's not terrible for these fish to still be holding over this type of structure. Over here, Port Bay, this little drop edge here. Of course, this is, you got a couple of things. You got Swan Lake that's just back up in there, and it's been pretty good for us. I think I touched on it last week. But the same area, what's the great thing about there at this Port Bay on this flat that's out, if you've been on it, it can get really skinny, show, calf deep, lower calf, top of your shoe shallow. But then you've got this edge that's out here that drops off pretty good. It drops off 6 or 7 feet. So a couple of different things. Like in the summertime, we'll fish it later in the day because we know when it gets, that shallow water heats up and cools off faster. So, summertime, you're fishing deep late, shallow early. And in the wintertime, it's just the reverse. You're fishing deep early and shallow late. So, and especially if you got some pretty decent moving tides, which we have had here over last several days. We've had some big tides that have been coming back because of that moon pushing that water and pulling the water in here. So early mornings, right at daybreak, we'll fish throwing those suspended baits. I'm throwing plastics primarily, 16th ounce jig heads, whether that be a down south lure off the edge of that, throwing that thing out there in 6 to 8 foot of water and just kind of bringing it up that face of that edge and see if there's some fish that are hanging there for us. Some guys have been throwing the corkies. Really slow sink. This is where the original and the devil really come in handy because that devil will dive off into that deeper water fairly quick. And once you kind of get a good rhythm with that, it does well for you. Of course, again, it's a pretty decent sized profile bait. Your productivity with it during that wild card or full moon time was not great. But at the same time, it seemed like the fish that we caught off that little bit bigger profile were better quality fish. Sometimes when you're just trying to catch fish, you'll throw the smaller profile just to kind of get a pattern going to see what they're wanting, and then just kind of work from there. Some days we just kind of go out and we're going to try to trophy hunt, so we're going to throw something bigger on there, specifically to target bigger fish. And some of the days it did work out for us that way. Now, were they massive fish? No, but they were just over the slot. They were in that 21 to 23 size. They were still quality fish, real chunky, heavy, but they were still fun to catch. But it was fun to see how the kind of little bit of the difference in the profile size allowed you to have a little bit better quality fish. But from production size, we kind of stay with our game plan, staying in that smaller profile just to kind of get that pattern going, see what they like. And of course, you can get up here around this little grassy island right here and get up on this flat that runs here down that west shoreline. This one's pretty much tide predicated as well. It gets pretty skinny here up on this flat, but it's got the right kind of structure for you. So when you get some water that's kind of pushed back in here, it can be dynamic. It really can be really good. And of course, we come on around here on this west shoreline as we hit further into Port Bay, and there's a drop edge that's out there on it. And we just kind of work down that, especially with a little bit shallower water. We can get a little bit further away from the shoreline. Located primarily a bunch of trout. They weren't big trout by any means. They were all in that 14 to 17 inch size range, which is fine. But it was a good productive day. In the days that we did fish it, we had a lot of fun catching fish in here. We pulled in a redfish or two. They were kind of cruising up there that were decent size. We're in the mid slot on those, so those were fun to catch. But again, smaller profiles to mid-size profile, Miradines, soft dines, that size. It's a shorter bait. It's about a 3-inch, but it's a little bit fatter profile, so it's a great transition bait for you. Double D is another one. Multiple different flavors, and of course, if you're a Corky fan, the Corkies of the floaters and the sinkers, the Devils, the originals, all fit into that profile, and those are really good. Of course, you can get into the customs or the originals. I just throw the original stuff. I don't get into all the custom stuff. And then, of course, down south is our standby. Knock and Tail has been good as well. And, of course, the other baits that I mentioned, Coastal Brew and Pav Lures, have all been pretty decent for us as far as production goes. We've had a large variety of different guys throwing different stylistic kind of baits, some all the way up to 6-inch, all the way down to the little 2 3/4 inch, and it seemed like the majority of the fish that we were catching in that 4 down to that 2 3/4 inch size bait was working for us. Now, again, this is Christmas week. We're fixing to be into a new moon phase, those 10 days that surround that, the 5 days up to and the 5 days after. If you're able to get out on the water and enjoy it for at least one of those days, you probably will do yourself a big favor in taking advantage of some of these areas. Depending on what if we don't have big moving tides or anything, which there's nothing that's kind of dictating that's going to take place. Looks like a beautiful week ahead, as it should be for Christmas. So hopefully you have a great week. And if you do get on the water, be safe, have fun, and we'll see y'all out there.